I'm Madison Brooks, 28 years old, and I've always been my father's daughter. When I arrived at my parents' house that Tuesday afternoon, clutching travel brochures for Scotland, my mother's words cut deeper than any Highland blade. "We all agreed," she said with a satisfied smirk. "You're not welcome at your dad's anniversary party." Little did she know, her cruelty would set off a chain reaction that would uncover family secrets buried for decades. If you're watching this, please hit subscribe to discover powerful family stories every day. Trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I always felt like I belonged in a different family story. While my career as a marketing director eventually took me to Nashville, my connection with my father, William, remained my strongest family tie. Bill Brooks was the kind of dad who never missed a soccer game, who taught me to change a tire before I could legally drive, and who slipped encouraging historical facts into my lunchbox throughout middle school. He was my anchor, steady, reliable, and endlessly curious about the world, in a family that often felt like shifting sand. My mother, Patricia, was a different story entirely. From my earliest memories, she maintained a cool distance from me while showering attention on my older brother, Ethan. The family photos told the real story: Ethan and Mom arms, linked and beaming, while Dad and I stood slightly apart, connected by our shared love of history and adventure. It wasn't that she was overtly cruel, at least not obviously. It was more insidious: the forgotten achievements, the dismissed dreams, the constant comparisons to my more successful brother. "Why can't you be more like Ethan?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Ethan, 4 years older and seemingly perfect in every measurable way, excelled at law school, brought home prestigious internships, and somehow always managed to meet our mother's impossible standards. I tried desperately to earn that same approval. When I graduated from Vanderbilt with my marketing degree and landed my first job at a tech startup, Mom's response was predictably lukewarm. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Ethan just made junior partner at his firm?" Always the comparison, always falling short. Everything shifted last year when Dad suffered a minor heart attack during a faculty meeting. I immediately took leave from work and flew home, spending 3 weeks helping with his recovery. Mom resented my presence, making pointed comments about how I was disrupting their routine. But Dad's grateful smiles were worth every barb. During those weeks, watching mortality suddenly become real, I made a promise to myself I would make their 25th wedding anniversary truly special. Working as a senior marketing director had its advantages, mainly a salary that allowed me to save aggressively. For 18 months, I carefully set aside funds for what I envisioned as the perfect anniversary gift: a trip to Scotland to explore the Brooks family heritage. Dad had always talked about visiting the Highlands, tracing our family roots back to a castle his great-grandfather had described in letters before immigrating to America in 1923. When I first proposed the idea during a family dinner 8 months ago, the responses seemed encouraging. Dad's eyes lit up like a child discovering buried treasure. "Scotland? Really, you'd do that for us?" His excitement was all the confirmation I needed. Ethan nodded appreciatively, his wife Sarah chiming in about Scottish whiskey distilleries she'd always wanted to visit. Even Mom seemed cautiously supportive, asking practical questions about timing and accommodations. I left that dinner feeling hopeful already, mentally planning the perfect 10-day Scottish adventure. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. The way Mom's smile never quite reached her eyes when discussing the trip. The subtle shift in Ethan's tone when he questioned how I could afford such an extravagant gift. The increasing frequency of Mom accidentally scheduling other events whenever I tried to discuss trip details. "Oh, I forgot you were coming over to talk about Scotland today," she'd say, ushering in her real estate clients as I arrived with Highland Castle brochures. "We can chat another time." Another time never materialized, but I remained optimistic. This was for Dad and Mom's anniversary after all. Surely everyone would come around once they saw how much it meant to them. By February, with their June anniversary approaching, I took a week off work to finalize the trip details. My Nashville apartment transformed into Scotland planning headquarters, with maps of the Highlands taped to walls and Celtic history books stacked on every surface. I'd spent countless nights researching the perfect locations, finally settling on a restored castle in the Trossachs, with enough rooms for the whole family and breathtaking views of Loch Katrina. The property's owners, the MacLeod family, were delighted to hear about our Scottish roots and promised access to their private clan archives. "Your father will feel the pull of his ancestors here," Mrs. MacLeod assured me during our video call. "The Highlands call their children home." Those words brought tears to my eyes. This was exactly what I wanted for Dad. A connection to his heritage, a chance to walk the same glens his great-grandfather had described in those faded letters. I even managed to track down distant relatives still living in the area, the Sterling branch of the Brooks family, who had maintained detailed genealogical records and still lived near the original family lands. They sent photographs of ancient documents mentioning our ancestor's name before he sailed for America. I imagined Dad's face when he met them, when he held those records in his hands, when he stood in the castle where his great-grandfather had been born. Each detail I secured felt like another gift I could give him. I researched whiskey tastings, where we could sample spirits aged in barrels older than our American family history, arranged for a private tour of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and even booked a day trip to Stirling Castle to see where Scottish independence was fought for and won. Every confirmation email felt like another piece of a perfect puzzle falling into place. While my excitement grew, my family's enthusiasm seemed to wane with each passing week. Mom began suggesting alternative celebrations during our weekly phone calls. "Your father might prefer something simple," she said one evening. "You know how he gets overwhelmed by too much planning." This from the woman who threw herself elaborate birthday parties with guest lists exceeding 100 people. Dad was allegedly overwhelmed by a trip to Scotland, but Mom wasn't overwhelmed by the massive garden parties she hosted each spring. Ethan became increasingly difficult to reach. My texts about flight options went unanswered for days. When he did respond, his replies were perfunctory at best. "Whatever you think is best," he'd text, without engaging with any specific details. Sarah, always the peacemaker, occasionally reached out with vague encouragement, but offered little practical input. "I'm sure whatever you plan will be lovely," became her standard response. Only Dad maintained genuine enthusiasm, asking questions about our itinerary and attempting to pronounce Gaelic place names with charming determination. Loch Lomond. He'd practice his American accent, mangling the Scottish pronunciation, but his eyes sparkling with anticipation. 3 months before the trip, Mom invited me to Sunday dinner. I arrived bearing gifts, a guidebook for Dad, and Scottish shortbread for everyone. The atmosphere felt strange from the moment I walked in. Ethan and Sarah were already there, huddled in conversation with Mom, that abruptly halted when I entered the room. "We were just discussing summer plans," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Throughout dinner, whenever I mentioned Scotland, the conversation mysteriously shifted. Dad would begin asking questions, only to be interrupted by Mom, offering more potatoes, or Ethan, suddenly remembering work stories that couldn't wait. It felt coordinated, this conversational redirection, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. After dessert, I stepped onto the back porch to take a call from my boss. As I finished, I overheard Mom and Ethan in the kitchen, their voices just loud enough to carry through the screen door. "She's completely taken over their anniversary," Mom was saying, "as if she's the only one who knows what your parents want." "I know," Ethan responded. "It's always been like this. Madison and Dad in their own little world. We need to do something before she finalizes everything. Your father deserves a proper celebration, not some exhausting trip at his age." Their words froze me in place. The dismissal in their tones, the resentment. Was that how they saw my gift? As a selfish attempt to monopolize Dad's attention? I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach, questioning everything. Was I pushing this trip for Dad or for myself? Was I ignoring what he truly wanted? When Dad called the next morning, specifically to ask about the clan archives I'd mentioned, his genuine excitement reassured me. This wasn't about me versus them. This was about giving Dad and Mom a dream they'd held on to for decades. In early March, with airline tickets needing finalization, Mom texted, asking me to come over to discuss anniversary plans. Finally, I thought, progress. Maybe they'd accepted that this trip was happening and wanted to contribute ideas. I arrived at my parents' suburban home on a Thursday evening, noting Ethan's BMW in the driveway. Normally, he'd text when he was visiting from across town. Another small sign something was off. Inside, I found Mom, Ethan, and Sarah seated in the living room, like a tribunal already in session. Their conversation halted abruptly when I entered, like a movie paused mid-scene. "Where's Dad?" I asked, noticing his absence immediately. "Faculty meeting," Mom replied curtly. "We thought it would be better to talk without him first." Red flag number 1. I took a seat on the edge of the sofa, suddenly feeling like a defendant rather than a family member. Mom sat unnaturally straight in her armchair, hands folded like she was preparing to deliver rehearsed lines. "We've been thinking about your anniversary plans," she began, emphasizing "your" in a way that immediately set me on edge. "While the trip idea is interesting, we think something local would be more appropriate." More appropriate? I repeated the words, feeling foreign. "Yes," Ethan jumped in, lawyer mode activated. "We've discussed it extensively, and a local celebration makes more sense for everyone." "Everyone except Dad and Mom," I countered. "They're excited about Scotland." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, examining her wedding ring with sudden interest. "Your parents are being polite," Mom said dismissively. "At their age, a transatlantic trip would be exhausting. We're thinking of hosting a garden party here instead. Family, friends, colleagues, people who truly matter to them." The implication that I somehow didn't fall into that category wasn't lost on me. For the next hour, we talked in circles. Or rather, they presented a united front, while I tried desperately to understand what was happening. Every argument I made was countered with vague concerns about my parents' preferences, their health, the impracticality of travel. Not once did anyone acknowledge Dad's expressed enthusiasm for the trip. "Let's compromise," I finally suggested, exhaustion setting in. "What if we do both a party here before we leave then? The trip for immediate family only." The glance exchanged between Mom and Ethan spoke volumes. They had no intention of compromising. "We'll think about it," Mom conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We should include your parents in the next discussion." I left feeling disoriented, like I'd walked into a play midway through without knowing my lines. In the driveway, Ethan caught up to me. "Maddie," he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. "Try to see this from Mom's perspective. She wants to host their milestone anniversary. It's important to her. And Scotland is important to Dad," I replied. "Why does her want outweigh his?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Just consider the party idea okay, for family harmony." I nodded non-committally and drove home, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That night, I called Dad directly, something I rarely did. Our conversations usually happened when I called the house phone, and he answered, or during my visits home. One-on-one calls weren't our norm, which made this one significant. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked, immediately concerned by the unusual call. "I'm just checking in about the Scotland plans," I said carefully. "Are you and Mom still excited about the trip?" His voice immediately brightened. "Are you kidding? I've been boring my colleagues with Highland facts for months. Professor Martinez in the history department is threatening to hide if I show him one more picture of Scottish castles." The genuine enthusiasm in his voice confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a case of Dad being polite. This was something he truly wanted. "Some people seem to think it might be too much for you both," I ventured. "Too much?" he laughed. "Madison, I hike the campus hills every day. My doctor says I'm in better shape than most 40-year-olds. Who thinks Scotland would be too much? I hesitated, reluctant to create family drama. Just concerns I've heard. Well, tell whoever's concerned that this old professor can handle a little haggis and whiskey in the Scottish Highlands. The next morning, I received a text from Mom. We've all discussed it further. The local party plan is moving forward. We can talk about your trip idea later. Your trip idea, as if Scotland had been reduced to my personal fantasy rather than Dad's long-held dream. I tried calling multiple times over the next few days, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Texts received brief, non-committal responses. The silent treatment, Mom's favorite tactic when she wasn't getting her way. A week of silence followed, during which I wavered between anger and self-doubt. With the final payment deadline for the castle approaching, I needed clarity. What I got instead was the beginning of the end. After a week of unanswered calls, I decided to stop by my parents' house unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon in late March, the kind of early spring day that promises warmth but delivers chill. I brought Scottish tablet candy from a specialty shop, a peace offering, and a subtle reminder of the trip's purpose. As I turned onto my parents' street, I immediately noticed something unusual. Cars lined both sides of the normally quiet road. My stomach tightened as I recognized my Aunt Jennifer's Subaru Uncle Mike's pickup truck and at least a dozen other vehicles belonging to extended family and family friends. Through the large front windows, I could see movement. People milling about the living room, gathered in conversation clusters. No one had mentioned a family gathering to me. For a moment, I considered leaving. Whatever was happening inside, I clearly hadn't been invited. But the thought of running away made something harden inside me. This was my family, too. I deserved answers. I knocked on the front door rather than using my key, suddenly feeling like a visitor rather than a daughter. My cousin Ashley opened it, her smile faltering when she saw me. "Madison, I didn't know you were coming." "Apparently not," I said, keeping my voice neutral as I stepped past her into the entryway. The living and dining rooms had been transformed into Party Central. A large banner reading, "Bill and Patty's 25th Anniversary Celebration, June 15th, stretched across one wall. My Aunt Jennifer stood on a stepladder, hanging decorations, while my uncle discussed catering options with a woman I didn't recognize. Mom's friend Debbie was addressing envelopes at the dining table. Invitations, I realized, with a sinking feeling. My mother emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee cups, freezing mid-step when she saw me. The expression that crossed her face wasn't guilt or even surprise. It was annoyance. "Madison," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "What's all this party planning committee?" she said, as if it were obvious. "For your parents' anniversary." I looked around at the committee, which apparently included every family member except me. Even distant cousin Mark from Albuquerque had somehow made the cut. "You're planning their party without me." Several relatives glanced awkwardly in my direction before becoming intensely interested in their coffee cups or phones. Mom set down her tray and gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's talk privately." I followed her, aware of the whispers that erupted behind us. The kitchen was a disaster zone of cake samples and catering menus, evidence of extensive planning that had clearly been underway for some time. "Why wasn't I included in this?" I asked, keeping my voice low, despite the anger building inside me. Mom busied herself rearranging dessert samples on a plate. "We didn't think you'd be interested given your alternative plans." "My alternative plans? You mean the trip Dad has been excited about for months? The trip I've been saving for over 18 months to make happen? Your father has accepted that a local celebration makes more sense," she said dismissively. "He understands that at his age, international travel is impractical." "Did he tell you that? Or did you tell him that?" I challenged. Her eyes narrowed. "You always think you know what's best for everyone, don't you, Madison? Always trying to be the hero, the perfect daughter." The sudden venom in her voice startled me. This wasn't just about an anniversary party or a trip. This was something deeper, something that had been festering for years. "This isn't about me," I insisted. "It's about Dad and Mom's anniversary, about what would make them happy." What would make them happy is having all their loved ones together, not being dragged across the world on some expensive trip nobody asked for. The trip was always optional for everyone else. I said, frustration mounting. "If you didn't want to go, you could have just said so. But Dad wants to go, and it's their anniversary we're celebrating." Mom slammed a hand on the counter, causing cake samples to jump. "Why can't you accept that the decision has been made? We're having a party here. That's what's happening." "And what about Scotland?" "There is no Scotland, Madison. It's not happening." Her voice had risen enough that conversations in the next room halted. In the awkward silence that followed, I could feel dozens of eyes focused on the kitchen doorway. "You know what?" I said quietly. "Let me talk to Dad. Where is he?" A flicker of something, guilt, worry, crossed her face. "He's not here." "Where is he?" "Out running errands," she said too quickly. "He'll be back later." I pulled out my phone and called him. The familiar ringtone echoed from somewhere in the house. The study, if I had to guess. Mom's face tightened. "He forgot his phone," she said lamely. That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that I was being lied to, systematically and deliberately. My father never went anywhere without his phone. After his heart scare, it had become a security measure we all insisted upon. "I think I'll wait for him," I said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen island. Panic flashed across Mom's face. "That's not necessary. We're quite busy here, as you can see. I'm not leaving until I talk to Dad." I sat quietly while Mom fluttered around the kitchen, clearly flustered by my presence. After about 15 uncomfortable minutes, Ethan appeared in the doorway, obviously sent in as reinforcement. "Maddie," he said, with forced casualness, "didn't expect to see you today." "Apparently, no one did," I replied coolly. "Funny how that works." "Listen," he said, lowering his voice as he took the seat beside me. "This isn't personal. We just thought it would be easier to plan things separately, given the differences of opinion." "Differences of opinion?" I repeated incredulously. "You mean the fact that I actually considered what Dad wants for his anniversary?" Ethan's expression hardened. "You always do this. Act like you're the only one who really knows Dad, the only one who really cares about him." "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying their anniversary should reflect their wishes, not everyone else's. And you think a 10-day trip to Scotland is what a 60-year-old couple wants to be dragged around foreign countries when they could be celebrating with friends and family at home?" "Yes, actually, that's exactly what Dad told me he wants." Our voices had risen again, drawing attention from the other room. Mom stepped between us, her face a mask of controlled anger. "That's enough," she hissed. "You're ruining everything as usual." Something in me snapped. Years of being the family outsider, of having my feelings dismissed, of being treated as an afterthought. It all culminated in this moment of crystal clarity. "As usual," I echoed, standing up. "You know what, I want to know exactly what's going on here. Why am I being excluded from Dad's anniversary planning? Why is everyone acting like I've committed some terrible offense by trying to give him a meaningful gift? What exactly is happening here?" The kitchen had filled with onlookers, aunts, uncles, cousins, all watching the drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination. Mom looked at their faces, then back at me, something shifting in her expression. The polite mask dropped, revealing something ugly underneath. "You want to know what's happening?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Fine," we all agreed. "You're not welcome at your dad's anniversary party." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several relatives gasped. Someone, Aunt Jennifer, I think, murmured, "Oh, Patty," in shocked disapproval. But it was the smirk that appeared on my mother's face that truly broke something inside me. The satisfied curl of her lips as she finally said out loud what she'd apparently been thinking for weeks, maybe years. I stared at her, This woman who had given birth to me, trying to reconcile her cruelty with any concept of maternal love I'd ever hoped for, but never quite experienced. "Good to know," I said, finally my voice eerily calm, even to my own ears. Without another word, I walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, full of staring relatives, and out the front door. No one tried to stop me. No one called after me. The silence was confirmation enough. This wasn't just Mom's doing. Somehow, I had become the family pariah, and no one was willing to stand up for me. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. First to the castle owners in Scotland, canceling our reservation. Second to the travel agency, handling our flights and tours, canceling everything. Third, to my bank, transferring the entire $47,800 from the dedicated vacation account back to my personal savings. With each cancellation, each transfer, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. The dream I'd held for Dad was dying, but something else was being born. A realization that I deserved better than this, better than being the family scapegoat. As I drove away from my childhood home, I sent one final text to my father. "I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I won't be at your anniversary celebration. I hope someday you'll understand why." Then I blocked everyone's numbers. Mom, Ethan, Sarah, all the extended family who had stood in silent complicity. Everyone except Dad. His line would always remain open. My apartment had never felt so empty. That night, I found myself sitting on my balcony, watching the Nashville skyline twinkle against the darkening sky. 12 floors up, the city noise was muted, creating the illusion of solitude in a metropolis of millions. My phone remained face down on the coffee table inside. I couldn't bear to see the notifications that might be piling up, or worse, the absence of them. The doorbell rang at 9:30, startling me from my trance. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer, my best friend since college, holding a paper bag that clinked with the unmistakable sound of bottles. "I brought reinforcements," she said, when I opened the door, pulling out wine, chocolate, and ice cream. "Your text sounded apocalyptic. What happened?" For the next 2 hours, I poured everything out. The months of planning, the growing resistance, the ambush party planning, and finally my mother's devastating declaration. Jennifer listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to outrage. "That's seriously messed up," she said, finally refilling our glasses. "I always knew your mom was difficult, but this is next level. The worst part is that Dad doesn't even know," I said, the wine loosening the knot of emotion in my chest. "They've been making decisions about his anniversary, excluding me, all while pretending it's what he wants." "What if you still went?" Jennifer asked, suddenly. "To Scotland, not for their anniversary, but for yourself." The idea seemed so foreign, so selfish, that I almost dismissed it immediately. But something about it caught in my mind, a tiny spark of possibility. "You've been saving for 18 months, Jennifer continued. "The money's there. You clearly need a break from your family drama. Why not use this opportunity to take care of yourself, for once?" By midnight, Operation Solo Scotland was officially underway. I booked a different castle, a smaller one in the Isle of Skye, and completely different itinerary, focused on what I wanted to see, rather than family obligations. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. 18 missed calls, 37 text messages, 3 voicemails. Most of the calls were from Ethan, with a few from Mom, and several from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably concerned relatives. But one voicemail caught my attention from Ethan, left at 3:17 a.m. "Madison, it's me." Ethan's voice sounded strange, hoarse, emotional, in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. "I need to talk to you. God, I've messed up. We've all messed up. Mom's been lying to everyone, including Dad. He never knew about the Scotland trip you planned. She told him you refused to attend any anniversary celebration for them. He's been devastated, thinking you didn't want to be part of their special day." A long pause, the sound of a shaky breath. "Call me back, please." Dad deserves to know the truth. The confrontation with my mother was every bit as difficult as we had anticipated. Seated in the living room, where I'd been told I wasn't welcome, just days before, we formed a triangle of truth around her. Dad, Ethan, and me, united in our demand for honesty. At first, she tried denial, then deflection, then tears. When those tactics failed against our united front, anger flared, decades of resentment bubbling to the surface. The things she said that day about my relationship with Dad, about her feelings of exclusion throughout our family history, about her perception of being undervalued and overlooked, were painful to hear but necessary to understand. "You've always been his favorite," she spat at me, abandoning all pretense. "From the day you were born, I was secondary in his life. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To watch your husband bond with your daughter in ways he never connected with you." The raw hurt in her voice was genuine, even if her actions remained inexcusable. Dad listened in stunned silence, hearing for the first time the depth of insecurity that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. "Why didn't you ever talk to me about this?" he asked finally. 25 years of marriage. Patty and you never once expressed feeling this way. "Would it have changed anything?" she countered. "Would you have loved her, been less proud of her accomplishments, spent less time teaching her everything you know?" "That's not how love works," Dad said gently. "It's not a finite resource to be divided up. Loving Madison never diminished what I felt for you." By the end of that long, exhausting day, 3 things had been established. First, my mother would begin therapy to address the deep-seated insecurities and resentments that had driven her behavior. Second, Dad would temporarily move into his campus apartment, creating space for both of them to process what had happened. And third, the Scotland trip would proceed as planned, a father-daughter journey to connect with our heritage. 2 months after the confrontation, Dad and I boarded a flight to Edinburgh. The Scotland trip had transformed from its original conception, smaller in scale, but perhaps richer in purpose. Just the two of us following the thread of family history back to its source. The Isle of Skye welcomed us with dramatic cliffs and ancient castles that seemed to embody mystery itself. Our accommodations, a restored tower house overlooking Loch Corrywisk, couldn't have been more different from the family castle I'd originally booked. Yet something about its intimate scale, its ancient stones warmed by centuries of Highland sun, felt exactly right for our journey. On our 3rd day, we drove to the village of Portree, where Dad's great-grandfather had been born before immigrating to America in 1923. The narrow streets and weathered buildings hadn't changed much in the intervening century, creating the uncanny sensation of walking through our own history. The local genealogy center was housed in a converted church, overseen by an elderly man who clapped with delight when we explained our connection to the village. "Brooks," he exclaimed, recognizing the family name. "Aye, there's still family here. The Sterling line, they'd be your distant cousins." Through his enthusiastic guidance and our careful research, we learned that several branches of the Brooks family still lived in the region. One phone call later, and we were invited to Sunday lunch at the home of Duncan Sterling, whose great-grandmother had been a Brooks before marriage. That Sunday became the emotional heart of our journey. Seated at a long table overlooking the sound of sleet, surrounded by Scottish cousins, 3 and 4 times removed, Dad wept openly when Duncan produced family records dating back to the 1700s. "Your great-grandfather Malcolm," Duncan explained in his lilting Highland accent, "was remembered as the adventurer who sought fortune in America. His brother Hamish stayed here and maintained the family croft. You're descended from 2 brothers with different dreams, but the same Highland blood." We spent hours poring over yellowed documents and faded photographs, piecing together connections across time and ocean. Dad's face throughout was a study in wonder, every new discovery lighting him up from within. "Thank you," he whispered to me that night as we walked back to our tower house under a canopy of Highland stars. "For finding this, for making it happen despite everything." This has been the greatest gift of my life. The rest of our trip unfolded like a dream. Whiskey tastings, where we sampled spirits aged longer than our American family history. Tours of ancient castles, where our ancestors had lived and fought. Quiet evenings sipping local ale on our terrace, while discussing everything from Scottish history to family memories. Free from the tensions that had defined our family dynamic for so long, Dad and I discovered new dimensions to our relationship. Deeper conversations than had ever been possible at home. We returned to America, connected, not just to our ancestral past, but to a new understanding of what family could mean when built on honesty and mutual respect. The homecoming was both easier and harder than anticipated. Mom met us at the airport, her usual polished exterior, softened by 2 months of therapy and reflection. The hug she gave me was tentative but genuine. Perhaps the first authentic embrace we'd shared in my adult life. "I'd like to hear about your trip," she said, as we walked to the parking garage. "If you're willing to share it with me." It was a small olive branch offered with unprecedented humility. I accepted it with cautious optimism. The family anniversary dinner that followed a week later was modest compared to the elaborate party originally planned. Just the 5 of us. Dad, Mom, Ethan, Sarah, and me at Dad's favorite steakhouse. No banners, no extended family, no performance of perfect family harmony. Instead, something more valuable, honest conversation, careful listening, and the first fragile shoots of healing. Over the following year, our family landscape continued to shift and settle into new patterns. Mom and Dad eventually reunited under one roof. Their marriage fundamentally altered, but perhaps stronger for having survived its greatest test. Weekly family therapy sessions became monthly, then quarterly, as new communication patterns took root. My relationship with Mom would never be simple or entirely comfortable, but it became something I hadn't expected: authentic. The pretense of perfect mother-daughter harmony was replaced by careful respect and growing understanding. We would never be best friends, but we were learning to be honest allies in the complex business of family. Ethan and I rediscovered the sibling bond that had been buried under years of maternal manipulation. Sunday brunches became our tradition, a time to maintain the connection we'd nearly lost completely. As for Dad and me, our shared Scottish adventure became a touchstone, a perfect memory we could return to whenever family waters grew turbulent. The photo of us with our Scottish relatives' Highland peaks stretching to the horizon behind us took pride of place on his office desk, a reminder of the journey that had begun in betrayal but ended in profound connection. 1 year later, on their 26th anniversary, we gathered again, this time at a small Scottish pub owned by a chef from Skye, who had become our friend during our stay. As we shared dishes made from recipes older than our American family history, I realized how completely the narrative had transformed. The mother who had once told me I wasn't welcome at my father's celebration now sat across from me, sharing stories of her own therapy journey with unexpected vulnerability. The brother who had once been her unwitting accomplice now raised a glass in my direction, acknowledging without words how far we'd come. And Dad, watching it all with quiet satisfaction, seemed younger somehow, unburdened by the weight of family secrets and unspoken resentments. "A toast," he said, lifting his glass of Highland single malt, "to truth, to healing, and to the understanding that family isn't something we're given. It's something we create together every day through choices and forgiveness and love." We clinked glasses, the simple sound sealing a complex promise. Looking around that table, I understood something essential about the nature of family wounds and healing. The scars would always be there, visible in certain lights, tender to certain touches. But scars also represented survival resilience, the remarkable capacity to repair after injury. Our family had been broken open, its darkest dynamics exposed to painful light. Yet from that breaking had come the possibility of authentic connection. Messy, imperfect, but real, in a way that our previous carefully maintained facade had never been. As I drove home that night, windows down to catch the summer breeze, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my adult life. The journey hadn't been what I expected. They rarely are, but it had led exactly where I needed to go. Have you ever experienced a painful family revelation that ultimately led to healing, or found yourself excluded from something important, only to discover it opened a better path? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that even the most painful family dynamics can transform with courage and truth. Thank you for listening to my journey. May your own path lead to the healing you deserve.